Well, hello, hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Doctors Changing Medicine podcast. And I have one of my favorite doctors in the world on the episode today. So get ready for a treat. I have Dr. Nwando Anyaoku, and we go all the way back because she interviewed me for residency. And fortunately, I ended up in her program. And I got to be mentored by her. A lot of it was what she said, but most of it was just by watching her be. So I get you to experience some of that magic today. So lean in and get ready. Welcome to the show, Dr. Anyoku.
Thank you, Dr. Una. This is always fun.
It's always fun. All right, so I give my version of the introduction because I'm just fangirling, but I'm going to let you introduce yourself.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Nwando Anyaoku. I am Chief Health Equity Officer for Swedish Health Services, which is a multi-hospital system in Greater Seattle area. And I've been on this journey of healthcare and discovering how best to serve in that space for a couple of decades. Dr. Una's aging me by talking about me interviewing her for residency, but I'll forgive her.
Thank you.
But yeah, it's been an interesting journey. I'm a pediatrician by training and have done a lot of peds and recently transitioned into this space of focusing on health equity. So great to be here.
Love it. Now, one of the reasons why I asked you to introduce yourself is because I love the way you introduce yourself. And most of the time, as physicians, when we say, hey, so introduce yourself, we get, I'm a board certified, ENT doc, or I'm board certified allergist. And so I guess my first question to you would be, how do we learn to perceive all of our value, right? And so when we show up, we're not just showing one fragment of ourselves and say, "Oh, I hear this a lot. I'm just a pediatrician." I'm like, "What does that?" First of all, there's nothing just about being a pediatrician. But second of all, that's not all. So how do people learn how to own all of it?
Well, I think it's exactly that. It's owning it, right? I think a lot of times because we've put so much blood, sweat, and tears into this thing and many, many years, it just sort of becomes what we do, right? And you think that everybody's doing it. Well, everybody's not doing it. You're doing it, right? And and you've brought yourself and your gifts into this space. And I think over the past couple of decades, just because medicine has changed so much, and a lot of us are feeling burned out and stressed out, you start to think of yourself in the way the system wants you to think of yourself as a widget,
Mm,
one cog in the wheel. But I am firmly of the belief that, medicine and all the different aspects of it is appalling, right? And that you have an opportunity to serve in this way. And if you think about it as service, then it's not about I'm just a pediatrician. I mean, first of all, that just sets my teeth on it, just for the record. But just anything, right? You have a privilege to serve in this space in this way. And so the way that I've thought about it, like I described, is a journey, is that I've served in this way. I served clinically, I've served administratively, and now I get to serve on a bigger scale, really looking at health equity and how we are reducing disparities and changing the impact of the way that health is experienced by people. So I think about it as service. And when you think about it as service, then it doesn't, it's not about you, it's about what you bring into the space. So that's been the way that I've always advised people to think about it.
Now, I wrote down the widget stuff, right? Like we've been conditioned to think about ourselves the way the system thinks about us, like a widget. My goodness, that is so okay. Unwidget yourself, people. All right. So now you alluded to the burnout and all of that, right? Doctors feeling devalued and everything is on an all-time high. And I think that there's a lot of stuff that has to happen on a systemic level, but I also think as physicians, there's some mistakes we've made, either in the way we shown up or the ways we didn't own boundaries and stuff like that. That kind of made it easier for that to happen. So I know you've mentored a lot of people, you've coached people. What are the mistakes that you notice as physicians we make that doesn't help this whole situation? So it doesn't mean necessarily we're at fault, we created everything. It's not a blame game, but what are some of those things that we do?
My biggest challenge with us as physicians is that we think of what we do as a job, right? I
Yeah.
show up and come to do a job. Well, even if you look at the definition of job, what we do cannot be described as a job, Now, and in thinking about it as a job, then you think, oh, I'm here for X amount of hours. And then when I'm beyond those hours, you start getting antsy, right? Oh, and I'm here to do X amount of patients. So when you have to add another person to your schedule or change your day in some way, it starts to be irritating. And if you change your perspective, which is really how we have to deal with all of life, by the way, you have to change your perspective because that's all you control. If you change your perspective and think about it as like I said, service, as something that you're giving, then it doesn't, you're not subject to those annoyances in much the same way. But what makes a big difference is understanding that you have put so much and learned so much and developed yourself so much to be able to do what you're doing. So don't let anybody negate you, right? Or make you feel like, you could pick somebody off the street. They just can't. They can describe all the things they want to do about the healthcare system. None of it works without you. And if you understand that, then it sort of gives you a different space to stand and say, all right, well, let's see how you're going to make this work without me, right? because it just doesn't work without you. And so I think the mistake you would make is to think of yourself as just doing a job, because the paradigm of healthcare is never just a job. And always thinking about how am I improving my craft? How am I improving my skill? How am I improving my own fulfillment in doing this work is kind of, what I really emphasize that people should think about. Because then it's about you and your gift as opposed to what those people want you to think about.
And so for the doctor who's listening and is like, wow, okay, I need to change my perspective. I need to change and look at it from a standpoint of service. So this is what I do. This is what I bring to the table. Someone is probably thinking at the back of their mind, well, if I do that, then they take advantage of me, right? Because I'm thinking only about service. So how does that person prevent that from happening, if that makes sense?
It does indeed. It's a very important question because service doesn't translate to free, right? Because you get a service, you offer a service and people pay you for it.
Yes.
But you are also the resource. Therefore, you must manage this resource, right? You're not available for everything because there's only X amount of you. So you have to see yourself as that valuable resource that has to be carefully guarded. Because if you're trying to do 500 things at the same time, or if people are making you work in a way that's not compatible with your values, then you deplete the resource. And so what you have to do is protect that essence of you and your ability to be able to do what you want to do for the long term. Because, as many first child moms, daughters, women recognize, we are used to saying yes, 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 yes until we crash and burn, right? And this is the same thing in your professional space. You need to be valued for what the service that you bring. You don't go to get your nails done and get it done for free. It's a service, but you got to pay for it, right? You're not going to get your car fixed and get it done for free. So even if you're offering that service, that resource has to be husbanded, has to be cared for.
And so that would mean things like, like you're alluding to saying no when,
Mm-hmm.
this is something that's going to overstretch me or something that's out of, is not congruent with my values and stuff. Now, for someone like me, and I'm sure there are many people like me, the old version of me would do anything to avoid conflict. Like anything, right? So the thought of saying no or the thought of standing up for myself and stuff like that is just like why can't people just do what they're supposed to do so we don't have to deal with all of this, right? There are a lot of people who are people pleasers, all those kind of things. So how does someone start that journey of because I love the way I told you guys this was going to be amazing, right? Managing the resource, which is you. How do they start that process of protecting the resource?
I'm very envious of people who innately just know how to set boundaries. It's not a fight, but we're going to do this and we're not going to do that, right? And we're going to go this far and no further. There's some people for whom that's a gift. for others of us, we have to kind of hit a wall before we realize that we need to draw boundaries. And the magic is in the middle, is to figure out, it's actually not in the middle, the magic is at the beginning, but most of us have to get to that point, right? And 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 not to think about it as conflict, right? It's about clarity and setting definitions and just having a grown-up discussion about what it is that, what it is that makes sense, because a lot of times where we run into trouble is not being clear about expectations, right? We're not clear what they want from us, and so we interpret it as, oh, well, I guess they also want this, and the other thing. And they're like, oh, well, I guess you're going to do that. Yeah, let's do that, and or conversely, you're not clear on expectations. So they think that you've shown up as a doctor, therefore you must be on call 24/7, 7 days a week and all of that. And aren't you the doctor? So the way to think about it is when you hire someone, for instance, to work in your office, onboarding is critical. You have a conversation with them that says, this is my expectation of you, right, as a general guideline. And that's the same way you want to think about it. So be clear upfront what the expectations are, understanding that in our profession, stuff is always going to come up, right? And that's where you are clear about your values, and your values guide what you're willing to do and not willing to do. Understanding that part of those values includes family time, includes rest and self-care, right? And so if you map those out clearly in your head, then when the challenges come, you already have a roadmap that says, no, this conflicts with my values. And I'm not going to be able to do that, because if I don't stop work and if I don't get to see my kids, I will not feel good as a mom. I won't feel good as a person. I won't give you my best, right? So being clear about what's important to you is really key in being able to determine how you draw those boundaries as you go forward.
Ah, okay. Phew. Not conflicts. This is a grown up conversation. I love it. I'm adopting that. No conflict. Now, I know you've done a lot of mentoring and coaching and stuff over the years. And I know you have the best stories. So could you give us some before and afters? Of course, not details and all of that, but before and afters of, somebody who was either burnt out, stressed out, felt like they were stuck and all that kind of stuff. And what life then looked at the other end after they made some of these changes. Because we're at a time where a lot of physicians feel like they're stuck. Like, this is my life and I can't move from this job. So I just have to deal with this and all this stuff. But our options are literally limitless, So
Challenging to tell those stories in a way that's de-identified.
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
But I
but
have faith in you.
I think of a physician who had gone through many years, had built a practice, and worked, and just one day hit a wall. Right, the hit a wall thing is real. Right, we hit a wall in a variety of ways. Either we're just like emotionally broken down, or physically we start to suffer random chronic illnesses that is your body telling you that you're doing too much, or you just run into some either regulatory or financial challenges just because you can't be present, right? And so so many of us hit a wall for a variety of reasons, and this physician hit a wall and was like so devastated that they didn't want anything to do with medicine anymore. Well, here's the challenge, right? I am all for, exploring multiple side gigs and passions and all of that, but it's hard for you to sit down 30 years into a career and chuck it all away, right? Like, really, you're going to just throw all that away? And I'm not saying that in doing the next thing that you have to do it in the same way, but there are things you can distill out of that journey. It might be managing people, it might be managing money, it might be just knowing something about the skincare routine that you had to have in place to be able to show up, when you were wearing masks all the time, or the hair care routine that you had to do to manage with scrub caps. What is it in this journey that you learned in 30 years of doing it that can inform the next thing you do? And so we had lots of conversations about how do you think about it differently so that you don't feel that devastating loss. Because when you feel that the last 30 years of your life was a waste, it's really, really hard to get energized for the next 30. It's just hard because you're just like, you spend all your time in regret and
Yeah.
just, and it doesn't move you forward. And so we kind of worked through, how do you even distill out what was valuable for you? And on the other side of it, she decided to start, beauty business, right? And because every time I need makeup tips, I call her, because she would be so annoyed. Like, if we spent our young years studying and taking exams when other girls were figuring out how to do their makeup, we never did that. Was that true? It was true, right?
It
We were
was
spending.
true.
So, okay, what do I do? How do I fix these groceries? And so she always knew that. I'm like, you know what? This is something you know how to do. Why don't you do that? So she started doing it, right? And so she started educating women about beauty tips and things like that. And you talk about looking for pain points on an entrepreneurial journey. People will pay to avoid pain, and people will pay to be beautiful. I don't care what time or
I love it. I love it.
to be beautiful. And now she uses her medicine to give herself a cushion, right? So she does locums every 2 to 3 weeks. She'll go for a week and make sure she's paid her baseline bills as she builds this other business. And she's so radiant. She's so happy because she's doing something different, but she didn't have to lose everything, because that her healthcare background allows her to have a cushion while she develops the new thing she wants to do. And so that's kind of the way that I think about things. There is something in this journey that you got. How do you use it to take you to the next level?
Okay, so I totally wasn't thinking you're gonna pull out this distillation thing that you just pulled you pulled right now. So now I have questions. Okay. So doctors out there, they've been practicing for 5 years, 7 years, and all of that. And maybe they're not at a point where they want to quit or anything like that. But they're thinking, so what about my journey? Like how do they look at their journey in a way that they can pull out the next business from their first 7 years of practice? Because that is so powerful, because sometimes people think they have to go out and start from scratch. I'm like, wow, you can't start from scratch. You've built this whole thing. You know what I mean? So how do they start looking for those ideas?
I think about it as finding what is the essence of you, right? Because the essence of you is different from the essence of me. And in that space, so there are people who are family medicine doctors of all sorts, but there are some family medicine doctors who run, right? And they become running coaches. And there are some family medicine doctors who cook, and they teach people how to cook and how to prepare healthy food. And at the end of the day, all of you have the same family medicine practice, but each of you has something unique that you can bring and infuse into your clinical background, or take from your clinical background and infuse into that. So this physician, beauty is her thing. So she brings that into her clinical background. So what is it that makes you tick? What are your values? What makes you wake up in the morning excited? What would you do? You hear this all the time. What would you do if you didn't have to worry about getting paid, right? Some people write, some people act, some people, model. All of it, we need all those pieces as part of life, right? And I think one of the challenges we have is that we make ourselves one-dimensional as clinicians, but you're not one-dimensional, right? You're you, and your particular flavor seasons whatever it is and whatever environment in which you are. But you have to own that, and you have to recognize that. And nobody's going to recognize it for you. I mean, people might call it out and say, you're really good at this. And you're like, yeah, whatever. That's just something I do when I have time. I never have time. But if you stop and you start to listen and gather those stories, right, it might actually, have a spotlight for you that you may have missed. So I encourage people to own their whole self and own their whole journey as you evolve, because what you bring is unique.
I don't know what to do with you now. This is so good. This is so okay. So I'm writing, right? Like if you saw me looking down, it's because I'm taking notes. That's how good this is. Okay. So you talked about not being a widget. You talked about changing our perceptions, our perspectives. You talked about that, like, I am the resource. So I have to, it's my responsibility to manage this resource called me. You talked about reframing the way we think about conflict. It's not conflict, it's grown up conversation. We're trying to create clarity. You talked about distilling the essence of you. Oh my goodness. I can't. This is so good. All right, everybody. This is one of those that when you're done, you're going to have to just go back, listen to it again. The end. That's the way this is going to work. Okay. So people are like, oh my goodness, you're right. She's fascinating. Where do we find you? Where do they find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. It's the easiest place to find me. In a little bit, you'll be able to find a website, but for today, you can find me on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn it is, okay? LinkedIn it is, Dr. Wando Anyaoku. I will put the link in the show notes so you can look for it there. I like to end every episode with a question. So I say that the Doctors Changing Medicine podcast is not just a podcast, it's a movement. And the idea is if we don't like the system, there's a million of us, we can change the system, right? So I'm like, you have to share the episode. So, what would be the reason why you tell a doctor listening, you have to share this episode? I mean, other than you're on it. I mean, that's reason enough. But,
I'll,
what other
I'll to,
reason?
well, you've heard, I'll get serious for a minute, just to talk about moral injury.
Hmm.
And I think we've talked about moral injury a lot in healthcare space, in the context of burnout. And I think the moral injury is that the system is not preserving us. So we have to preserve ourselves. And we need each other's support to preserve ourselves. As, if you think about old society, physicians were almost sacred, right? Physicians and teachers. And we've gone so far to the other side that, you're just some other random thing. And yet the work we do is sacred. So there's a discord, right? In the values mismatch between what it is that we're doing and the way that we are perceived. And so we need each other as people who have been on this journey together to work together to redeem ourselves, right? So that we can hold ourselves together on this journey. And so, as I would say that when you share this to other physicians, that it helped to remind each other that we must preserve this resource. We must preserve ourselves and our gifts for society, because if we all fall out, then what's going to happen, right? So, and yet nobody can understand our journey but us. And so it's so great, as physicians, to support one another as we try to navigate this space.
Wow. Okay. I haven't gotten an answer like that yet on the podcast. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. That is true. And that is powerful and it is serious. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, listen, everybody. You have to go on LinkedIn. You have to go follow her and follow her work. And thank you so much for coming on the show and for sharing this. I mean, this could have easily been 5 different podcast episodes. So for sure, I'm going to have to bring you back on the show. Thank you so much for coming.
Anytime. Thank you for having me.
All right, docs. I will see you on the next episode of the Doctors Changing Medicine podcast. Go share the episode.